Captain Jack Thompson stood at attention in the gleaming corridor of Harmony Point Space Station, tugging nervously at his Earth Diplomatic Corps uniform. After 6 years of training in xenodiplomacy, he thought he was prepared for anything. He was wrong. The station's artificial gravity hummed beneath his feet as he waited for his first meeting with the Celestial Ambassador. His briefing documents had mentioned their species' unique characteristics, but reading about something and experiencing it firsthand were very different things. "Captain Thompson," a melodic voice called from behind him. He turned around and immediately forgot everything he'd learned in diplomatic training. Ambassador Lyra of the Astral Empire floated a few inches above the ground, her translucent skin rippling with waves of soft blue and purple light. The patterns flowed like northern lights across her tall, elegant form. Yes, Ambassador. Captain Jack Thompson, Earth Diplomatic Court. He extended his hand, then quickly pulled it back, remembering that Celestials preferred not to make physical contact during first meetings. Lyra's skin flickered with spots of golden light that danced across her surface. "Your species' greeting customs are fascinating," she said, her silver eyes twinkling with amusement. "Shall we proceed to my office?" Jack nodded, falling into step beside her floating form. He tried to focus on walking straight, but his eyes kept being drawn to the mesmerizing patterns flowing across her skin. A spiral of light would start at her shoulder, then cascade down in a waterfall of color that. "Captain Thompson," Lyra's voice carried a hint of playfulness. "My eyes are up here." Jack's face turned bright red. "I'm so sorry, Ambassador. I didn't mean to. I was just..." He forced himself to look directly into her silver eyes, which somehow made things even worse. They shimmered like liquid mercury. "No need for embarrassment," she said as they entered her office. "Many species find our bioluminescence distracting at first." The patterns across her skin suddenly intensified, creating a dazzling display. Though some of us might occasionally enjoy that fact. Jack fought to maintain eye contact as he sat down across from her desk. The room's soft lighting only made her glow more prominent. "I appreciate your understanding, Ambassador. I look forward to strengthening the relationship between our species. Please, call me Lyra," she said, a ripple of pink light running across her skin. "And I must say, humans are quite fascinating themselves. Your faces change color so expressively. Like now, for instance." Jack realized he was blushing again. "Yes, well, that's an involuntary response to various stimuli." "Various stimuli?" Lyra leaned forward slightly, her skin pulsing with curious patterns. "How intriguing. Perhaps you could elaborate." Before Jack could stumble through a response, his communication device chimed. "Excuse me," he said, grateful for the interruption. "It seems the station director needs to see me." "Of course," Lyra said, rising gracefully. "We'll have plenty of time to discuss human physiological responses during your posting here." Her skin sparkled with what Jack could have sworn was mischief. As he hurried down the corridor afterward, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just experienced something more than a standard diplomatic meeting. He made a mental note to review the section about celestial bioluminescent communication patterns in his briefing materials. He had a nagging suspicion he'd missed something important in their interaction. Behind him, Lyra watched him leave, her skin glowing with patterns that, had he known how to read them, would have translated to something like, "Oh, this is going to be fun." In the station's security room, two alien officers exchanged knowing looks. The Verdaxian officer passed a few credits to his mechanoid colleague. "Told you he wouldn't last 5 minutes without staring," the mechanoid chirped, its optical sensors whirring with satisfaction. "Want to place odds on how long before he figures out she's flirting?" The betting pool had officially begun. 2 weeks into his posting on Harmony Point, Jack Thompson found himself in increasingly awkward situations. It seemed that wherever he went, Ambassador Lyra would appear, her bioluminescent patterns more eye-catching than ever. Like now, for instance. "Captain Thompson," Lyra called out across the station's garden dome, her skin shifting through shades of sunset orange. "What a pleasant surprise to find you here." Jack seriously doubted it was a surprise. This was the third time this week he'd encountered her during his morning walk. He fixed his eyes firmly on her face, ignoring the spiraling patterns that danced across her form. "Good morning, Ambassador," he said, proud that his voice remained steady. "Enjoying the earth roses?" "Oh yes," she replied, floating closer. Her skin rippled with waves of purple light that seemed to flow toward him. "Though I find some things here even more fascinating than the flowers." A passing mechanoid officer's servos whirred with poorly suppressed laughter. "The station's botanical collection is quite impressive," Jack said quickly, desperately trying to keep the conversation professional. "We have specimens from 12 different worlds." Lyra moved to examine a rose, positioning herself so that the glowing patterns along her arms created mesmerizing reflections in the garden's water features. "Humans have such interesting ways of avoiding topics," she mused. "Your species' dedication to maintaining professional distance is amusing." Jack gulped. Was it getting warmer in the garden dome? "I'm not avoiding anything," he said, then immediately proved himself wrong by taking a step back as Lyra's glow intensified. "Of course not," she agreed, her silver eyes sparkling. "Just as you're not avoiding looking at my bioluminescent patterns, which, by the way, are considered a form of communication among my people." Jack froze. Communication? Indeed. Lyra's skin danced with quick, playful bursts of light. "For instance, what I'm expressing right now would translate roughly to, well, perhaps it's better if you study our cultural documents to figure that out." In the distance, a small group of alien station staff huddled around a datapad, updating their betting pool. "I should probably do that," Jack managed to say. "Study the documents, I mean. For diplomatic purposes." "Oh, absolutely," Lyra agreed, her skin now pulsing with what could only be described as delight. "Though I must say, your human diplomatic training seems to have overlooked some crucial aspects of celestial interaction. For example, did you know that maintaining eye contact while completely ignoring our light patterns is considered incredibly intimate in our culture?" Jack's face went from normal to bright red in record time. "What?" "Oh yes," Lyra continued, clearly enjoying his reaction. "What you've been doing these past 2 weeks, focusing solely on my eyes. It's quite forward of you, Captain." Her skin flickered with teasing patterns. "Not that I mind, of course." I mean," Jack stammered, his diplomatic training deserting him entirely. "The cultural exchange meeting starts in 5 minutes," Lyra said, taking pity on him. "Shall we walk together? I promise to keep my patterns at a professionally appropriate level." The surge of bright colors across her skin suggested she had no intention of doing any such thing. As they walked to the meeting, Jack tried to focus on anything except Lyra's mesmerizing display. He failed miserably. Behind them, a Verdaxian maintenance worker spoke into their communicator. "Update the betting pool. Double my credits on complete diplomatic meltdown by the end of the month." They paused, watching Jack nearly walk into a wall while Lyra's skin shimmered with barely contained laughter. "And add a side bet on the human needing medical attention for walking into something while distracted." The cultural misunderstandings were just beginning. The grand dining hall of Harmony Point Station had never looked more impressive. Crystal chandeliers floated in zero-gravity bubbles, casting rainbow reflections across the gathered diplomats. Jack Thompson tugged at his formal uniform collar, watching as the Celestial Council of Elders filed into the room. "Nervous, Captain?" Lyra whispered as she glided up beside him. Her usual playful patterns were replaced by formal, slow-moving waves of royal blue, the traditional color of celestial ceremony. "Me? Nervous? Never," Jack lied, trying not to stare as her formal patterns made her look even more striking than usual. "Just another diplomatic dinner." Indeed, a hint of her usual mischievous glow flickered briefly across her skin before returning to the formal display. "Though I should warn you, the elders are very traditional." The head of the celestial delegation, Elder Luminor, approached them. His ancient skin barely glowed anymore, showing only the faintest silver patterns. Ambassador Lyra, he said in a voice like rustling leaves. This is the human diplomat you spoke of. Yes, Elder, Lyra replied with perfect composure. Captain Jack Thompson of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. Jack bowed respectfully. It's an honor to meet you, Elder Luminor. Your reputation glows brightly across the galaxy. There was a sudden silence. Lyra's formal patterns stuttered for a moment. A young celestial diplomat in the background made a choking sound. Elder Luminor's dim patterns flared briefly. What did you say? Jack realized something had gone very wrong. I meant that your reputation precedes you, he stammered. First you make a light pattern pun in formal company, Elder Luminor said sternly, and then you try to cover it with a human idiom about preceding. His patterns showed clear disapproval. I didn't mean. Jack started, but then he caught sight of Lyra beside him. Despite her formal appearance, tiny spots of pink light were dancing across her skin like suppressed laughter. A younger celestial in the delegation couldn't contain themselves anymore and burst out in bright flashes of amusement. This set off a chain reaction among the younger diplomats, their skin patterns flickering with barely contained mirth. This is most irregular, Elder Luminor declared, though Jack noticed small sparks of light appearing in his previously dim patterns. Lyra stepped forward smoothly. Elder, if I may. Captain Thompson has been making a dedicated study of our culture. His creative use of illumination metaphors shows his deep appreciation for our ways, even if his execution is still developing. Jack watched in amazement as Lyra somehow turned his diplomatic faux pas into a demonstration of human dedication to cross-cultural understanding. Is this true? Elder Luminor turned to Jack. You study our patterns. Put on the spot, Jack decided honesty was his best option. Actually, sir, I find them impossible not to study. Your culture's ability to communicate through light is fascinating. He glanced at Lyra. Though I admit, some patterns are more distracting than others. This time, it was Lyra's turn to show surprise as her formal patterns rippled with unexpected pleasure at his words. Elder Luminor's ancient face crinkled in what might have been a smile. Well said, young human. Perhaps there is hope for this cultural exchange after all. He turned to the gathered diplomats. Shall we begin dinner? As they moved to their seats, Jack heard the betting pool bookkeeper, a mechanoid server, whispering to others. New category, time until Captain Thompson accidentally proposes using a light pun. Current odds are 3-1. Lyra leaned close to Jack as they sat down. Your glowing personality seems to have won them over, she whispered, her skin dancing with tiny sparks of gold. Jack groaned quietly. Now you're just making fun of me. Always, she agreed, her pattern spelling out something that made another young celestial diplomat choke on their drink. The dinner was just beginning, and Jack had a feeling his diplomatic adventures were about to get much more interesting. The mood in conference room Alpha was tense. Jack sat on one side of the large oval table with the Earth delegation, while Lyra floated on the opposite side with her celestial colleagues. The trade route dispute had been going on for 3 hours, and nobody was happy. The spiral arm route has been open to all species for centuries, Jack argued, trying not to be distracted by how Lyra's skin showed patterns of frustration he was finally learning to recognize. Earth ships have every right to use it. The route passes through 3 different celestial nebula nurseries, Lyra countered, her usual playful glow replaced by serious pulses of deep blue. Your ship's engine emissions are affecting our young stars. In the corner, Ambassador Reed from Earth whispered to his assistant. Thompson seems very focused on the celestial ambassadors' diplomatic points. Jack pretended not to hear them. The betting pool was bad enough without his own delegation joining in. Perhaps we could suggest a compromise, Jack began, but another celestial diplomat cut him off. Ambassador Lyra, the diplomat said in their musical language, Your patterns show unusual warmth when addressing the human captain. Are you certain your judgment isn't clouded? Lyra's skin flashed with indignation. My patterns show professional courtesy, nothing more. But Jack noticed small spots of pink appearing at her edges that suggested otherwise. The Earth Trade Minister leaned forward. If the Celestials are letting personal feelings affect these negotiations, we are doing no such thing, Lyra said firmly, her patterns now a swirling storm of colors. Jack had never seen her so upset. Just then, Ambassador Vex of the Mercurial Confederation stood up. His silvery skin reflected the room's lights as he spoke. Perhaps we should take a short break. Tensions seemed to be illuminating the situation poorly. He gave Jack and Lyra a knowing look. In the hallway outside, Jack caught up with Lyra. "Hey," he said softly. "Are you okay?" Her patterns had dimmed to a gentle glow. "I'm fine. It's just complicated." She looked at him with her silver eyes. "This would be easier if..." "If what?" Before she could answer, Ambassador Vex appeared beside them. Fascinating, isn't it? How personal connections can both help and hinder diplomatic relations. His reflective skin showed their images back to them. A human and a celestial, standing closer than strict protocol would allow. "I don't know what you mean," Lyra said, but her skin betrayed her with tiny flickers of gold. "Of course not," Vex smiled. "Just as I'm sure the betting pool I'm not supposed to know about is purely fictional. Though if it did exist, I would have placed my credits on mutual pining, disrupts major trade negotiations." Jack coughed. "Shouldn't we get back to the meeting?" "Indeed," Vex said. "Though consider this, sometimes the best diplomatic solutions come from understanding both sides. And you two seem to understand each other quite illuminatingly well." As they returned to the conference room, Jack caught Lyra's eye. Her patterns formed a small private message that he was just beginning to understand. An apology, mixed with something warmer. "Maybe," Jack said quietly, "we need to look at this problem from a different angle. Earth could adjust our engine configurations for the nebula sections, and the Celestials could help us develop better shielding technology." Lyra's patterns brightened. That could work. A joint project would benefit both sides. The rest of the meeting went smoother, though Jack noticed both delegations watching him and Lyra carefully. In the station's security office, the betting pool had a new category. First, human celestial joint technology project leaders. Later, as they left the conference room, Lyra paused beside Jack. "Your suggestion was brilliant," she said, her patterns showing sincere admiration. "For someone who still can't read half my signals, you're surprisingly good at finding the right path forward." Jack smiled. "Maybe I'm starting to understand more than you think." Her patterns danced with pleasure. "We'll see about that, Captain. We'll see." "No, no," Lyra laughed, her skin shimmering with amusement. "You're thinking too hard about it. Light patterns are like your human facial expressions. They should flow naturally." Jack sat across from her in the station's observatory, trying to understand the datapad of celestial communication patterns. After the trade negotiations, they had agreed to help each other better understand their cultures. The stars stretched out behind them through the massive window, providing a stunning backdrop to their lesson. "So when you do this," Jack pointed to a swirling pattern in the book, "it's like a human smile." "Not exactly." Lyra demonstrated the pattern, her skin glowing with gentle waves of blue-green light. "This is more like contentment. A smile could be more like this." She changed her patterns to show quick, bright pulses of gold. "That's the pattern you showed when I made that accidental pun at dinner," Jack realized. "You're learning," Lyra said, her skin now showing both patterns combined. "Though you humans have your own fascinating ways of communicating, like how your cheeks change color when you're embarrassed." "Like they're doing right now?" Jack asked dryly. "Exactly." Lyra floated closer, studying his face. "And these tiny movements around your eyes when you're happy, they're like micro-patterns of their own." A passing maintenance bot whirred to a stop, its optical sensors recording the scene. The betting pool would definitely want to see this. What about this pattern? Jack asked, pointing to another image in the book. I've seen you use it sometimes when we're talking. Lyra's skin suddenly flickered with surprise, then settled into a soft pink glow. Well, perhaps we should save that lesson for another time. The maintenance bot's processors nearly overheated from calculating the new betting odds. Now it's your turn, Lyra said quickly. Tell me about human body language. Your diplomatic manuals are quite vague on the subject. Jack thought for a moment. Well, for example, when someone leans in while talking to you, it usually means they're interested in what you're saying. Like you're doing right now. Lyra asked innocently. Jack straightened up quickly, making Lyra's skin dance with those golden laugh patterns again. And what does it mean, she continued, when a human's heart rate increases during conversation? I notice yours does that quite often during our meetings. You can tell that. Celestials are sensitive to subtle energy changes, she explained, her patterns forming what Jack now recognized as a teasing display. Your species produces fascinating electromagnetic variations with your emotions. That's not fair, Jack protested. I can't read your energy fields. No, Lyra agreed, but you're getting better at reading my patterns. Like right now, what do you think these mean? Her skin shifted into a complex swirl of colors. Jack studied the display carefully. There's the happiness pattern we just learned, and something like the formal diplomatic pattern. But also, yes, there's that pink pattern you won't explain to me. Lyra's glow intensified slightly. Very observant, Captain. Perhaps you're ready for some more advanced lessons. Before Jack could respond, both their communicators chimed with an urgent message. The maintenance bot quickly rolled away, transmitting the latest betting pool updates. Duty calls, Lyra said, her patterns returning to their professional configuration. But as they headed to their meeting, she added, though we should definitely continue these lessons, you're proving to be an excellent student. Thanks, Jack replied. Though I can't help feeling you're still keeping some patterns secret from me. Lyra's skin flickered with that mysterious pink glow again. All in good time, Captain. All in good time. The maintenance bot, safely around the corner, sent one final update to the betting pool. Cultural exchange progress, 47%. Recommended updating odds on accidental love confession through pattern misunderstanding to 2-1. The emergency alarms of Harmony Point Station blared through the corridors. Red warning lights flashed everywhere, except in the section where the power had already gone out. Jack ran through the dimly lit hallway, his emergency light beam bouncing off the walls. Status report. He called into his communicator. 3 masked intruders in the power core. The security chief responded. They've taken control of the main reactor and are threatening to overload it. They're demanding all celestial diplomats leave the station immediately. Jack's heart stopped for a moment. Lyra, he whispered. Then louder. I'm heading to the power core now. Captain Thompson, a familiar voice called from the darkness. Lyra floated toward him, her natural bioluminescence cutting through the gloom. I thought I'd find you running toward the danger instead of away from it. Ambassador, you should be in the safe zone, Jack protested. My people can see in the dark and sense energy fluctuations, she said firmly. Her patterns showed determination mixed with concern. You need me on this. A distant explosion rocked the station. Fine, Jack agreed, but stay behind me. Lyra's skin flickered with what he now recognized as amusement, even in this serious situation. You do remember I can float over any obstacles and generate my own light, right? They reached the power core's entrance together. Through the reinforced window, they could see 3 figures in black environment suits working at the main control panel. They've locked down all the entrances, Jack said, examining the sealed door. Lyra's patterns shifted to a concentrated glow. The auxiliary cooling system still has maintenance access. It's too small for environment suits. Which means they can't follow us through there. Jack finished her thought. But how do we get to it? Lyra's skin brightened. I can light the way. And you're smaller than most humans. Are you calling me short? Jack asked, managing a small smile despite the situation. I'm calling you conveniently sized for our current needs, Lyra replied, her pattern showing that teasing pink glow even in the midst of crisis. They found the maintenance hatch. Jack followed Lyra's glowing form through the narrow tunnel, trying to focus on their mission and not on how close together they had to crawl. The reactor's energy patterns are becoming unstable, Lyra whispered as they neared the core. We have maybe 10 minutes. They emerged on a high-maintenance walkway above the reactor core. The intruders were below them, still focused on the control panel. I have an idea, Jack whispered, but you'll need to trust me and be really, really bright. Lyra's skin pulsed with curiosity. Always. On my signal, give them the brightest light show you can. I'll handle the rest. Jack moved into position while Lyra prepared herself. The betting pool's maintenance bot, hiding in a corner and still recording everything, calculated the odds of success at exactly 33.7%. Now, Jack shouted. Lyra's entire body erupted in a dazzling display of light, brighter than she'd ever glowed before. The intruders, their eyes adjusted to the dim emergency lighting, were completely blinded. Jack swung down from the walkway, using moves from his basic training that would have made his instructors proud. In their confusion, the intruders never saw him coming. 2 minutes later, station security burst in to find 3 unconscious terrorists, one slightly bruised but very pleased human captain, and a celestial ambassador whose patterns were shifting between victory, relief, and something much more personal. That, Lyra said, floating down to help Jack up, was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen. Why not both? Jack grinned, then winced slightly. Though next time, maybe we could handle the diplomatic crisis without the acrobatics. Lyra's skin showed the pattern he'd seen in the cultural guide, the one she hadn't explained yet. This time, though, he was starting to understand exactly what it meant. The maintenance bot, emerging from its hiding spot, set its final crisis update to the betting pool. Time to create new category. First human celestial kiss. Estimated timeline. Very soon. 1 month after the crisis, Harmony Point Station buzzed with excitement. The Grand Hall was packed with representatives from every species for the signing of the new Human-Celestial Cooperation Treaty. Jack stood at attention in his dress uniform, trying not to fidget as Elder Luminar gave his speech. Through recent events, the Elder's voice carried across the hall, his patterns glowing with formal dignity. We have seen that our differences can become our strengths. Jack caught Lyra's eye across the room. Her formal diplomatic patterns couldn't quite hide the playful sparkle he'd grown to love. She'd been teaching him more about reading celestial patterns, though some lessons ended up being more distracting than others. The Joint Engine Modification Project, Elder Luminor continued, proves that humans and celestials can work together for the benefit of all. In the back of the hall, the betting pool committee, now a formally recognized station social club, was having a field day. The maintenance bot's processors were practically smoking from calculating all the new odds. And of course, Elder Luminar's patterns showed what Jack now recognized as amusement. Some forms of cooperation have been more unexpected than others. Several younger Celestials' patterns flickered with poorly hidden laughter. Jack felt his face turning red, but for once, he didn't mind. He'd gotten used to being the subject of station gossip, especially after what happened during last week's cultural exchange presentation. The treaty signing proceeded smoothly. As the crowd mingled afterward, Lyra floated over to Jack, her patterns shifting to their private communication mode, something they'd developed together over the past month. "Congratulations, Captain," she said, her skin glowing with that special pink pattern he'd finally learned to read properly. "Your diplomatic crisis management skills are becoming legendary." "Well," Jack smiled, "I had an illuminating teacher." Was that another light pun? Maybe I'm just trying to brighten your day. Lyra's patterns danced with joy. You're getting better at those, though your timing could still use some work. Like last week when I accidentally proposed during the presentation. To be fair, Lyra's skin shimmered with laughter. You didn't know that particular pattern combination meant eternal bond request in ancient celestial. At least Elder Luminar found it funny. Eventually, Ambassador Vex appeared beside them, his reflective skin showing their images standing close together. I believe, he said with a knowing smile, I just won the longest-running bet in the pool, though you two did take your time about it. The maintenance bot rolled past, its display showing the final betting pool results. Winner, Ambassador Vex. Bet placed. They'll make it official during a diplomatic function through a cultural misunderstanding. Odds, 150 to 1. Speaking of making things official, Lyra said, her patterns forming the now familiar combination that had caused such a stir at the presentation. Did you mean it? Even if you didn't know what you were saying at the time. Jack took her hand, something that had shocked the celestial elders the first time he'd done it, but was now accepted as one of those quirky human customs. I may not have known the exact pattern, he said, but I knew how I felt. I still do. Lyra's skin lit up with pure joy, bright enough to make nearby diplomats squint. Good, she said, because I've been practicing human customs too. She leaned in and kissed him. The hall erupted in cheers, flashing patterns, and the sound of credit chips changing hands. Elder Luminar's patterns showed the celestial equivalent of an indulgent smile. The maintenance bot's final update to the betting pool simply read, all bets paid. New pool opening. Date of first human-celestial wedding. Current favorite. During the next diplomatic crisis. Jack and Lyra didn't notice any of it. They were too busy creating their own light show. One that needed no translation at all.